I've known my best friend's sister for 3 years. 3 years of keeping my distance, respecting the invisible line, telling myself she was off limits. Then, one Friday night, I walked into a restaurant and found her sitting alone at a table for two. Back straight, water untouched, waiting for someone who was never coming back. I pulled out the chair across from her, and that one decision changed everything. This is the story of how I fell in love with the one person I was never supposed to want. Before we begin this story, we'd like to ask you something. How are you feeling today? Are you arriving here after a long day, from home, from work, or while taking a short moment to rest? Whatever your situation may be, we're truly happy to have you here. Make yourselves comfortable, because this story is for you too. My name is Jake Mercer. I'm 26 years old, and I design spaces for a living. Not homes offices. Specifically, I redesign the kind of cold, fluorescent-lit, soul-crushing offices that make people count down the minutes until 5 o'clock. My job is to walk into a room that feels like nothing and turn it into somewhere people actually want to be. I'm good at it. Most days that's enough. I work for a mid-size interior architecture firm in Austin, Texas. We mostly take on contracts with tech startups companies that have just raised their Series A and suddenly need a real office instead of a WeWork table and a dream. The work is good. The hours are brutal. Most nights I'm still at my desk at 11, staring at floor plans and wondering if I moved the kitchen island 3 feet to the left, whether the whole open concept layout would finally breathe the way I needed it to. My best friend is Natalie Park. We met freshman year at UT Austin over a shared hatred of our intro economics professor and a mutual love of late-night pizza. We lived together for 3 years after graduation, same apartment, same bad couch, same habit of leaving dishes in the sink for exactly 1 day too long. Daniel is a software engineer at an AI startup that's growing faster than either of us can keep track of. He's the kind of person who makes everything look easy, who walks into a room and immediately knows how to make everyone comfortable. He's been my closest friend for 7 years. He's the person I call when things go wrong, and the person I celebrate with when things go right. Daniel has a sister. Her name is Natalie Park. She's 32, 6 years older than Daniel, and she runs her own brand consulting firm that recently expanded from San Francisco to Austin. I've known about Natalie for as long as I've known Daniel. I've met her maybe a dozen times over the years. Family dinners, the occasional visit when she came through Austin, a holiday gathering once where we talked for 20 minutes about the best coffee shops in the city, and then went back to our separate conversations. Natalie is the kind of person who makes you sit up straighter when she walks into a room. Not because she's intimidating, exactly, but because she carries herself like someone who has already thought 3 moves ahead of whatever is happening. Sharp, precise, quietly confident in a way that doesn't need to announce itself. Every time I saw her, I thought the same thing. She is completely out of my league, and also, she is my best friend's sister. And those two facts together meant I filed whatever I felt into a drawer, pushed it closed, and left it there. I had a rule. It was simple. It was clear. Daniel was my person, the friend you don't replace, the one you call at 2 in the morning when your car breaks down or your heart does. You don't cross that line. You don't look at his sister the way I sometimes caught myself looking at Natalie. You just don't. So I didn't. For 3 years, every time Natalie walked into a room, I kept my distance. Polite, friendly, appropriate. I asked about her work, I laughed at the right moments, and I made sure I never once let my eyes linger a second too long. It wasn't difficult, exactly. It was just a choice I made every single time, quietly, without anyone knowing I was making it. 3 years. And I never once let myself think of her as anything other than Daniel's sister. Then came that Friday night, and everything I'd told myself for 3 years fell apart in about 3 seconds. Daniel texted us both at 6:47 that evening. Server crash at the office. Critical incident. He wasn't going to make it to dinner. He sent a separate message to me right after. Sorry, man. Tell Nat I owe her one. You two can just reschedule. I was already in my car. I pulled up Natalie's contact, typed out a quick message. Hey, Daniel's stuck at work. We can reschedule if you want, and then stopped. My thumb hovered over the send button for a moment. I don't know why I didn't send it. I told myself it was because she might already be there. I told myself it was the polite thing to do, to check in person, rather than leave her waiting alone with a cold notification on her phone. I told myself a lot of things that night. The restaurant was a Mexican fusion place on South Congress Avenue, warm lighting, exposed brick, the kind of place that's always slightly too loud on a Friday, but in a way that feels alive rather than overwhelming. I stepped inside and did a quick scan of the room the way you do when you're looking for someone you know. I found her in about 4 seconds. She was sitting at a table for 2 near the window. Her back was perfectly straight. The water glass in front of her was full and untouched. The bread basket at the center of the table hadn't been opened. Her phone was face down beside her silverware, and she was looking out the window at the street with the practiced calm of someone who has spent a long time learning how to look unbothered. I stood there for maybe 3 seconds. In those 3 seconds, I understood several things at once. The table was set for 2. Daniel had only texted us about dinner 20 minutes ago, which meant Natalie had already been here before he canceled. Which meant she hadn't come for a dinner with her brother. Which meant someone else had asked her here tonight, and that someone else had not shown up. Natalie Park, 32 years old, CEO, the sharpest person in any room she walked into, had been stood up. I don't know what made me walk over. I'd like to say it was purely friendly instinct, the decent thing to do when you see someone you know sitting alone in a restaurant on a Friday night. Maybe that was part of it. But I remember the way my chest felt when I crossed that room, something that wasn't quite nervousness and wasn't quite certainty, something in between, like standing at the edge of something you can't see the bottom of. I pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. She looked up. For half a second, genuine surprise crossed her face, and on Natalie, genuine surprise was rare enough that it stopped me for a moment. Then her expression settled into something quieter. A small smile, tired at the edges, but real. Jake. Her voice was even, composed. Looks like we both got stood up by Daniel tonight, I said. Something shifted behind her eyes. He texted me too. Something about a server crash. Sounds about right. I picked up the menu. I'm starving. What are you ordering? She looked at me for a moment, just a beat longer than necessary, and then she looked down at her own menu. The salmon tacos. I'll get the same. It was such a simple exchange. 4 lines of dialogue, 2 people looking at a menu, nothing that should have meant anything at all. But when the waiter came, and I ordered without looking up, and Natalie quietly closed her menu and set it aside, something had already changed. I could feel it the way you feel a shift in weather before the sky actually changes, something in the air, something that hadn't been there 3 minutes ago. For the first time in 3 years, it was just the 2 of us. No Daniel in the middle, no family dinner buffer, no polite 20-minute conversation with an easy exit. Just Jake Mercer and Natalie Park, sitting across from each other at a table for 2 on a Friday night in Austin, Texas. And I had a feeling neither of us was going to leave anytime soon. The salmon tacos were good. Neither of us mentioned that right away. For the first few minutes, we talked about Daniel, how the timing was classic, how he had a talent for disappearing at exactly the wrong moment, how his entire personality could be summarized as brilliant but unreliable in social situations. It was easy conversation. Safe. The kind you have with someone you've known at a distance for years. Then the waiter took away our appetizer plates, and the table got quiet. Natalie reached for her water glass the first time she'd touched it since I sat down and took a slow sip. She set it down carefully, looked at it for a moment. Then she said, without looking at me, "He was a lawyer. We met at a conference in Denver 3 months ago. Tonight was our third date." She said it the way someone reads a quarterly earnings report. Calm, precise, no inflection on any particular word. Like the information was data to be delivered rather than something that had happened to her personally. "The first 2 were fine," she continued. "Tonight he took a phone call about 40 minutes before you showed up. Said he needed to step outside for a minute." She paused. He didn't come back. I looked at her. She was still looking at her water glass. Her expression hadn't changed, composed, unbothered, the face she wore in every room I'd ever seen her in. But I had spent enough time around people to know the difference between someone who was actually fine and someone who had simply gotten very good at performing fine. Natalie was performing. "That guy's an idiot," I said. She looked up at me then. Something flickered across her face. Not quite surprise, not quite amusement. "You don't have to comfort me." "I'm not comforting you," I said. "I'm just telling the truth." For a long moment, she held my gaze. Then she reached across the table and picked up a piece of bread from the basket. She tore it slowly, almost absently, and took a small bite. It was such a minor thing, reaching for bread, eating something, but something about it made my chest tighten in a way I didn't fully understand. Like watching someone put down something heavy they'd been carrying for a long time. We ordered dessert. Neither of us suggested leaving. We talked about work, her new Austin office, my current project, the particular exhaustion of doing something you love so much, it starts to blur into something you can't stop doing even when you should. We talked about Austin itself, how the city had changed in the past 5 years, how half the restaurants we used to go to had closed during the pandemic, and the ones that replaced them somehow felt like a different city entirely. We talked about the strange loneliness of being a functional adult, how you can have a full calendar, a good career, people who care about you, and still lie awake at 2 in the morning feeling like something essential is missing. That last part, Natalie brought up. Not dramatically, just casually, in the middle of a sentence about something else, the way people sometimes let the truest things slip out when they're not being careful. "I think most adults are a lot lonelier than they let on," she said. "We just get better at looking like we're not." I didn't say anything. I just nodded. Because she was right, and because something about the way she said it quietly, without self-pity, like she was simply stating a fact she had made peace with, hit closer to home than I expected. We stayed for nearly 2 more hours. When we finally stood outside waiting for the valet, the night air was warm and carried the faint smell of rain that hadn't arrived yet. Natalie pulled her jacket tighter around her shoulders and looked out at the street. Then she said something that I wasn't prepared for. "You're the only person I called tonight, Jake." She said it simply, still looking at the street. After he didn't come back. I sat there for a few minutes, and I thought about who to call. And you were the only one I thought of. I didn't know what to say. Out of everyone in her life, colleagues, friends, family, people who had known her for decades, she had thought of me. Not Daniel. Me. I stood there holding that information, not quite sure what to do with it. "I'm glad you called," I said finally. She glanced at me then. Something in her expression was different from anything I had seen on her face before, softer, less guarded, like a window left slightly open. Then her car arrived, and the moment passed, and she was composed Natalie Park again, thanking the valet, adjusting her jacket, telling me to drive safe. But But on the drive home, I couldn't stop thinking about what she'd said. And somewhere on the highway, with the city lights sliding past my windows, I let myself think something I had been careful not to think for 3 years. I hadn't seen Natalie as just Daniel's sister in a very long time. 2 days later, I texted her. Not Daniel. Her. I told myself it was casual, just a friendly follow-up, the natural thing to do after an unexpected dinner with someone you'd spent 2 hours talking to. I typed out, "There's a farmer's market near South Congress on Sunday mornings. Good coffee. Thought you might want to check it out." Then I stared at it for probably longer than I should have before hitting send. She replied after 4 minutes. "What time?" No question mark. No emoji. Pure Natalie. 9:30. "I'll be there at 9:28. Don't be late." I smiled at my phone like an idiot. Then I put it face down on my desk and went back to work. Or tried to. She was already standing in front of a flower stall when I arrived on Sunday morning. I saw her before she saw me, which gave me about 3 seconds that I probably shouldn't have had. She was wearing a cream-colored knit sweater and dark jeans, her hair down instead of pulled back the way she always wore it in every professional setting I'd seen her in. She looked younger, softer, like a version of Natalie Park that didn't have to be on for anyone. Then she turned and saw me, and I realized I had been staring. "You're 2 minutes late," she said. "I was looking for parking. That's why adults leave the house earlier." But the corner of her mouth moved, just slightly, and something in my chest loosened. We walked through the market for almost 2 hours. The morning was warm for late spring, the kind of day that makes Austin feel like it's apologizing for the summer heat that's coming. The market stretched along several blocks: local honey vendors, small batch coffee roasters, handmade ceramics, flower arrangements that cost more than my grocery bill. Natalie moved through it with the same quiet focus she brought to everything, pausing at stalls that interested her, moving past the ones that didn't, asking vendors precise questions about their products. She bought raw honey from a beekeeper who explained the difference between wildflower and clover varieties for about 5 minutes, while Natalie listened with genuine attention. She bought a bag of single-origin coffee from a roaster who had just come back from Ethiopia. And she stood at a textile stall for a long time, running her fingers slowly along a deep blue knit scarf, back and forth, like she was thinking about something else entirely. "Get it," I said. She looked up. "I don't need a scarf in Austin. You're not buying it because you need it." She looked at me for a moment, then back at the scarf. Then she picked it up and handed it to the vendor without another word. I bought a loaf of sourdough from the stall next to it, mostly because Natalie had leaned over and said it smelled exactly like the bread her grandmother used to make at her house in upstate New York. That was reason enough. We ended up on a bench along Lady Bird Lake, the sourdough between us, watching the water catch the late morning light. Joggers passed behind us. A pair of kayaks moved slowly across the far side of the lake. Neither of us said anything for a while, and the silence was easy in a way that silences between people usually aren't. Then Natalie said, still looking at the water, "This isn't the first time someone has left me in the middle of something." I waited. "I don't just mean at restaurants," she continued, her voice calm and even, the way it got when she was saying something true that she'd already made peace with. "I mean in general. I think men like the idea of me, the successful woman, the one who has everything handled. They like an independent woman until they realize she doesn't actually need them to survive. And then they leave." She said it without bitterness. Just facts, laid out clean and clear. "I think they're scared of you," I said. She turned to look at me then, one eyebrow raised slightly. "And you?" I held her gaze. I think you're worth the effort." The silence that followed was different from the one before it. Heavier. Charged with something that hadn't been there a moment ago, like something unspoken had finally stepped into the light between us and was waiting to see what we would do with it. Natalie looked back at the water. She didn't say anything for a long moment. Then she reached into the paper bag and tore off a piece of the sourdough and handed half to me without looking over. We sat there a little longer, eating bread and watching the boats, talking about smaller things after that. But underneath every word, I could feel it. The shift, the line we had both been pretending not to see, starting to blur. That evening, I drove home with the windows down. Austin in late spring has a particular kind of evening air, warm, but not heavy yet, carrying the smell of cedar and cut grass and whatever the city is becoming. I had the radio on, but wasn't listening to it. I was thinking about the way Natalie had looked at me after I said she was worth the effort. Not the composed CEO look, not the polished version of herself she wore to every meeting and family dinner. Something quieter. Something I hadn't seen before. I was still thinking about it when Daniel called. Not a text, an actual call, which, from Daniel on a Sunday evening, was either nothing or something. I picked up on the second ring. "Hey." His voice was easy, relaxed. "How's the Riverside project coming?" We talked about work for a few minutes. His sprint deadline, my floor plan revisions, the particular misery of a client who changes their mind about the color palette after you've already ordered materials. Normal conversation. The kind we'd had 100 times on 100 Sunday evenings. Then, at the end, almost as an afterthought, Daniel said, "Hey, Nat mentioned you guys went to the farmer's market this morning. That's cool, man. I kept my voice even." "Yeah, I ran into her there. She said it was good." A pause. Just one beat too long. She sounded different when she mentioned it. Different how? "I don't know." Another pause. Just different. Daniel didn't say anything else about it. He moved on to something about a new taco place near our old apartment. And by the time we hung up 15 minutes later, the conversation had covered 4 other topics and felt completely normal. But I sat on my couch for a long time after I put the phone down. I knew Daniel the way you know someone after 7 years of genuine friendship, the rhythms of his sentences, the things he left out as much as the things he said. He hadn't been accusing me of anything. He hadn't been warning me. But he had been paying attention. And Daniel paying attention to something quietly was usually more significant than most people making noise about it. I set my phone on the coffee table and looked at the ceiling. Outside my window, Austin hummed its usual Sunday evening distant traffic, someone's music 2 floors up, the low sound of the city settling into the week ahead. Inside my apartment, it was completely still. I thought about the farmer's market, the way Natalie had moved through the stalls with that quiet focus, the way she'd stood at the textile booth running her fingers along the blue scarf like she was somewhere else entirely, the way she'd looked at me after I said she was worth the effort that unguarded half-second before the composure came back. I thought about the dinner, the untouched bread basket, the way she'd reached for a piece of bread after I told her the lawyer was an idiot. Such a small thing. Such an unreasonably significant small thing. I thought about what she'd said outside the restaurant. "You're the only person I called tonight." And sitting there in the quiet of my apartment, I finally stopped pretending. I wasn't just noticing Natalie Park. I hadn't been just noticing her for a while now. What I felt when I saw her name on my phone, what I felt when I walked into a room, and she was already there, what I felt sitting across from her at that table on Friday night that wasn't friendly interest. That wasn't the natural warmth you feel towards someone you've known at a comfortable distance for 3 years. I was falling for her. The thought settled over me with the particular weight of something you've known for longer than you've been willing to admit. Not a shock. More like finally turning on a light in a room you'd been navigating in the dark and seeing exactly what had been there all along. And then the second thought arrived, quieter and heavier than the first. She was Daniel's sister. Daniel, who had just called me on a Sunday evening and mentioned her name in a tone I couldn't quite read. Daniel, my closest friend for 7 years, who trusted me in the specific, unconditional way that only real friendship produces. I didn't text Natalie that night. I didn't call. I just sat there with the weight of both things, what I felt and what it meant, and let them settle side by side in the dark, because I already knew that whatever happened next, nothing was going to be simple. She texted me on a Wednesday night at 9. Big pitch tomorrow. Coffee machine died. Bring food, or I won't survive this. I didn't hesitate. I picked up Thai food from the place she'd mentioned once. 3 weeks ago, in the middle of a conversation about something else entirely. She hadn't even been talking about the restaurant specifically, just mentioned the street it was on. I remembered anyway. The elevator opened onto the 11th floor at 9:45. Natalie was waiting at the door, and for a second I almost didn't recognize her. Blazer draped over the back of a chair, hair slightly loose, a faint smudge of ink on her left wrist. She looked tired in a way she never allowed herself to look in public. "You didn't have to do this," she said. "I know. We worked for almost 3 hours. I helped her restructure the slide layout, pushed back on 2 data points I thought were buried too deep, fixed a transition that was losing the narrative thread. She argued with me when she disagreed. I held my ground when I thought she was wrong. It felt completely natural, like we'd been doing this for years." By 10:30, the deck was done. Natalie leaned back in her chair and looked at me for a long moment. "You always make everything easier," she said quietly. "I just brought food." Jake. The way she said my name made me stop. Don't pretend you don't know what I'm talking about. The room went still. Not awkward, something heavier than that. The hum of the air conditioning, the distant sound of traffic 11 floors below, and nothing else. Natalie set her laptop aside and turned fully toward me. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked uncertain. Not the composed CEO, not Daniel's older sister, just her. "I've been trying to call this friendship for months," she said. Her voice was steady, but her shoulders weren't. "I don't believe that anymore." I didn't move. "Why didn't you say something sooner?" I asked. She gave a small, tired smile. "Because you're the only thing in my life right now that actually scares me if I lose it." That hit harder than anything she could have said. I stood up slowly and walked around the table until I was standing in front of her. She looked up at me, and there was no mask, no performance, no careful distance. Just Natalie, exactly as she was, letting me see it. "Then maybe we should stop pretending," I said. She studied my face for a long moment. I could see the war behind her eyes, the part of her that had spent years protecting herself against exactly this, against exactly me. Then something shifted. A decision made quietly, the way the most important ones usually are. She reached out and touched my hand. Just her fingers against mine, the lightest possible contact. But it felt like everything. "I'm scared," she said softly. "I've spent a long time making sure no one could hurt me again. And you make me want to stop being so careful." I turned my hand over and laced my fingers through hers. "I'm scared too," I said. "But I'd rather be scared with you than safe without you." She let out a breath that sounded like it had been held for months. Then she stood, and I wrapped my arms around her, and she rested her head against my shoulder. Neither of us spoke. The city hummed quietly outside the windows, 11 floors below, going about its business like nothing had changed. Everything had changed. 2 days later, Daniel called. Not a text, a call. Can you come over? His voice was even. Controlled. The kind of controlled that meant he'd been thinking about what he wanted to say for a while. I drove to his apartment, our old apartment, the one we'd shared for 3 years. Same couch, same kitchen table where we'd eaten probably 500 meals together. I sat down across from him, and he didn't offer me anything to drink, which told me everything I needed to know about the tone of this conversation. He looked at me for a moment. Then he said, I know about you and Nat. I didn't insult him by pretending otherwise. How much do you know? Enough. Silence. Outside, a car passed on the street below. Inside, nothing moved. Daniel leaned forward, his elbows on the table. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, but every word landed clean. She was married once. It ended badly. I watched her rebuild herself from nothing for 2 years, working 18-hour days, convincing herself she didn't need anyone, turning herself into someone no one could touch. He paused. I was the only person she let in during that time, and it cost her a lot to do even that. I held his gaze and didn't say anything. If you're not serious, he said, if this is just something interesting that happened on a Friday night, I need you to walk away right now, before it goes any further. The room was very quiet. I thought about the untouched breadbasket, the farmer's market, the way she'd said, you're the only thing that scares me if I lose it, like it had taken everything she had to get the words out. I thought about 11 years of building walls, and what it had cost her to finally put something down. I've never been more serious about anything in my life, I said. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. He looked at me the way you look at someone when you're trying to see past what they're saying to what they actually mean. 7 years of friendship means you know how to do that with each other. Then he nodded. Once. Slowly. Don't make me regret this. That was it. No lecture, no conditions, just a best friend placing every ounce of his trust in me across a kitchen table and making sure I understood exactly what I was holding. I drove home with both hands on the wheel and the radio off. It wasn't permission. It was something heavier than that. Daniel wasn't giving me his blessing the way you give someone a gift. He was handing me something fragile and telling me, without saying it directly, that he knew I understood the weight of it, and I did. That evening I drove to her office. No food this time, no excuse, just me. She opened the door and looked at me for a moment. Then she stepped aside to let me in. You talked to Daniel? She said. Not a question. I did. And I walked to the center of the room and turned to face her. She was standing by the door, arms loose at her sides, watching me with an expression I couldn't fully read. Not guarded? Not open? Somewhere in between, like someone standing at a threshold, waiting to see which way the door would swing. I've spent 3 years pretending I didn't notice you, I said. Telling myself you were off limits, keeping the right distance, saying the right things, being exactly what I was supposed to be. I stopped. I'm done pretending. Natalie didn't move. I'm not asking you to have everything figured out, I continued. I'm not asking for a guarantee. I'm just asking one thing. I looked at her directly. Can we date? Just us. No more pretending this is something else. The question sat between us in the quiet office. She looked at me for a long moment. I could see the familiar war behind her eyes. The part of her that had spent years making sure no one could get close enough to hurt her again. Pushing back against the part that was simply tired of winning that particular fight. Then something settled. You realize this changes everything, she said quietly. I know. Daniel said, don't make him regret it. Something crossed her face, then surprise, and then something softer. She looked down at her hands for just a moment. When she looked back up, the war was over. Okay, she said. Simply. Cleanly. Like it was the easiest decision she'd made in years. Let's date. I hadn't realized how much air I'd been holding until I let it go. She laughed, then a small, real sound, surprised out of her, and I crossed the room, and she met me halfway, and I held her the way I should have held her 2 days ago in this same office, maybe longer than that, maybe for the better part of 3 years without knowing it. She pressed her forehead against my shoulder. I've been waiting a long time to stop being so careful, she said softly. I know. I tightened my arms around her. Me too. We didn't announce it. We didn't make it complicated. We just began. Jake brought coffee to her office on mornings before big meetings. Natalie started texting him about things that had nothing to do with work, a documentary she'd watched, a restaurant she thought he'd like, a question about a design decision that she probably already knew the answer to. Small things. The kind that don't mean much individually but add up to something real when you're paying attention. She still had hard days. Days when everything felt like too much, and she went quiet in a way that had nothing to do with him. On those days, Jake didn't push. He just showed up coffee made the way she liked it, strong with a splash of oat milk, left on her desk before she asked. He sat beside her on the couch while she worked through reports, his laptop open, saying nothing, just present, Natalie noticed. She didn't say anything about it for a while. That was her way, observing first, speaking when she was certain. He had learned to be patient with the silence. About 6 weeks in, Daniel invited them both to dinner. The 3 of them at a taco place near downtown, the kind of casual evening that could have been strange and wasn't. Daniel ordered too much food, talked too loudly about a product launch that had gone sideways, and pretended not to notice the way Jake and Natalie sat slightly closer to each other than they used to. At the end of the night, he raised his beer across the table and looked at Jake with an expression that was trying very hard to be neutral. I can't believe I'm saying this, he said, but you two actually make sense. It was the closest thing to a blessing either of them was ever going to get. Jake took it. Driving home that night, Natalie was quiet for a long time. Then she said, without looking over, "He's been waiting to say that for a while." I know. She smiled at the windshield. Small. Real. That was enough. One evening, maybe 2 months in, we were cleaning up after dinner at my apartment. Natalie was drying dishes. I was washing. The radio was on low. Outside, Austin was doing what Austin does on weeknights alive, but not loud, the city settling into itself. She handed me a glass and then didn't say anything for a moment. Then she asked quietly, "Why are you always so patient with me?" I thought about it. Not because I didn't know the answer, but because she deserved the real one. Because for the first time in my life, I said, I met someone who makes staying easier than leaving. She didn't respond right away. She set the dish towel down, turned off the faucet, and wrapped her arms around me from behind. Her forehead rested against my back. I put my hands over hers, and we just stood there in the kitchen, the radio playing something neither of us were listening to, the city humming outside. "I'm still learning how to trust this," she said softly. "I know. I'm not rushing you." She tightened her arms slightly. That was all. I still think about that Friday night sometimes, walking into the restaurant to meet Daniel, seeing her at the table for 2 back straight, water untouched, waiting for someone who was never coming back, standing there for 3 seconds, deciding, then pulling out the chair and sitting down. It was such a small thing. 3 seconds and one empty chair. But that's how it usually works, I think. The moments that change everything rarely look like anything from the outside. They just look like a person making a quiet decision in a loud world. Natalie taught me that love doesn't always arrive with noise. Sometimes it arrives like the last light left on in a room after everyone else has gone home. Quiet, steady, easy to miss if you're not paying attention. But once you notice it, you don't want to be in the dark anymore. The quiet is exactly where I found her. And it's exactly where I choose to stay. There's something nobody tells you about the kind of love that comes quietly. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with the dramatic moment you've been conditioned to expect. No grand gesture, no perfect speech, no single instant where everything suddenly makes sense. It arrives the way good things usually do. Slowly, steadily. In the spaces between ordinary moments, if you're paying close enough attention to notice. I spent 3 years following a rule I set for myself. A clean, simple rule that made perfect sense on paper. And then, one Friday night, in the span of about 3 seconds, I understood something I hadn't been willing to see before. That the most important decisions we make rarely feel like decisions at all. They feel like the only thing that makes sense. Like pulling out a chair and sitting down, like staying. I think a lot of us are walking around with rules like that. Rules we made to protect ourselves, to keep things simple, to avoid the particular kind of hurt that comes from wanting something you're not sure you're allowed to want. And those rules serve a purpose. Until they don't. Until you're standing in the middle of a restaurant looking at someone and the rule dissolves. And all that's left is the truth you've been carefully avoiding. Loving someone who has been hurt before isn't about fixing them. It isn't about being patient enough or steady enough or good enough to undo what someone else did. It's simpler than that and harder than that. It's just about showing up. Consistently. Quietly. In the small ways that don't look like anything from the outside but mean everything to the person receiving them. A cup of coffee left on a desk. A hand held across a kitchen table. 3 seconds, and one empty chair. That's all it ever really is. If this story found its way to something real inside you, if you've ever loved someone quietly, or been loved that way, or are still waiting to leave a comment below. I read every single one. And if you know someone who needs to hear that the slow, quiet kind of love is worth waiting for, share this with them. Sometimes the right story finds people at exactly the right moment. Thank you for being here. I'll see you in the next one.